Hello everyone, welcome to the daily newspaper analysis of the Shankar IAS Academy brought to you by the Civils Media team, and this is for the current affairs for the date of 31st of January 2025. Looking into the topics for discussion, the first article from the Indian Express talks about the Indian Air Force officer who is set to go for the mission from the space station. And next article title Managing Crowds at Religious Gatherings talks about the importance of the National Disaster Management Authority from the Indian Express. Third article discusses about the total fertility rate and the state's low birth rate as well as the state's total fertility rate, and this article is from the Hindu. And the last article discusses about the fund shortage by the United Nations Human Rights Commission, and this article is from the Hindu. So without any delay, let's get into the articles discussion one by one. Moving on to the first news titled, as number of births falls in Tamil Nadu, there are concerns rising about the elderly population. So here the article discusses about the number of live births which have fell to almost 6.6% in the last year, which is dipping to below almost 9 lakh for the first time in the year 2024. So according to the state government, here the officials and experts say that it can lead to a lot of socio as well as economic challenges. So according to the article here, the along with the decline in the live births, the state's total fertility rate, where we will be seeing the definition soon, have fallen to almost 1.4 percentage, 1.4, which have come below the replacement level of 2.1. Here in 1971, the TRF, that is the total TFR, that is the total fertility rate, was 3.9, but in 2020 the state's TFR is 1.4. So here from the year 1971 to 2020, there has been a drastic changes in all of the factors, that is socio-economic, political, health, demographic, and so on. So the article suggests that it needs to be a policy change, so and a deliberate effort to get to the replacement level, where it involves economic, socio as well as developmental factors. So in light of this article, we would see few definitions related to the terms which need to be understood, and also we'll be seeing the impact through all of those factors. First, let us see the definitions for few terms. What is CBR? That is the crude birth rate. That is the number of live births per 1,000 people per annum annually or per year. So here there is not any adjustment of age or sex taken in account. But when it comes to the birth rate, which is similar to the crude birth rate, here there are live births per 1,000 people per annum, but here there is adjustment of age and sex taken. So there can be bar for under what age or between male or female can be taken into account when it comes to the birth rate. Next is the total fertility rate. Here it is the average of children per woman born during her reproductive years. Next is the dependency ratio. Here the ratio of non-working population, that is the dependent population, which can be children and elderly, to the working age population, that is the non-dependent population. Next is the replacement level fertility. Here the total fertility rate should be at the level of 2.1 for having a stable population without the migration. So as I told before, this is the bar, this is the standard when it comes to the total fertility rate. So if it goes below this, there are concerns raising on the fertility rate, where it has effect on the live birth rate, and that is according to the article. So it should be 2.1 or above 2.1. And next is the infant mortality rate, where it is the number of infant deaths per 1,000 live births. So here the infant deaths can be under the age of 0 to 1. So these are the definitions. Now let us move on to the factors where it has larger impact due to the declining of the birth rate. So here the socio-economic factors, health demographic factors, policy involvement, government programs, economic factors, socio-demographic factor, and at the same time health factors, health and policy factors are important when it comes to changing the dynamics of a society related to the live births and other fertility, total fertility rates. So these slides would be very easy to understand. At the same time, it will be generalistic, but all these factors are very important to know the importance of live birth, importance of the total fertility rate in a society, where it has impact on the elderly population also and impact on a whole basis. So first let us see the socio-economic factors. Here factors like the higher female education, where according to the National Family Health Survey 5, where there has been a report on increasing of women pursuing higher educations and having involvement of careers aspirations, where it can normally have a accepting the childbirth and getting into marriages. So there is delay in the childbirth. Next is the urbanization and cost of living. Here rising costs have discouraged large families to separate from their families for them to live in the cities, and there is almost a direct change in the changing family structures, that is shift from the joint to nuclear families. Then the other factors such as delayed marriages, where women are involving themselves in more higher education as well as in more lot of career opportunities. It can also reduce their dependency on the reproductive window. And finally is it can all these factors culminate to have a work life balance issues, where there is importance for career aspirations, and at the same time there are a lot of limited scope when it comes to the leave applications during the maternity period and maternity benefits and so on. So there is always a mistrust, or there is always a concern over having childbirth. So there is always delaying of childbirth. So all of these factors are almost interrelated. Now next is looking into the health and demographic factors. According to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, here there is increased use of the contraceptive, where there are involvement of family planning programs by the state in itself. Then there is declining of infant mortality rate, as there is a direct need of fewer children needed. So when there is fewer children, there is directly an impact in the declining rate of the infant mortality rate. Next is having a change in the lifestyle and the fertility issues, where there is issues of obesity, stress, medical conditions, especially in the younger population. And this report is highly from the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Next is having reproductive health services. Here there is better access, reduces unplanned pregnancies. So it has direct effect on the live births as well as in the declining of the infant mortality rate. And there is importance of assisted reproductive technologies. According to the Indian Council Medical Research, here there is delayed childbearing, as there is increase in the lot of technologies related to the assisted rise technologies related to the childbirth, such as the uh, embryo manipulation, that is the sperm manipulation, egg manipulation, and so on. Now looking into the policy and government programs, here population control awareness programs, that is the Hum Do Hamare Do campaigns, that is uh, two children for a family of two, where it is released by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Thus it has direct impact on the fertility rate. Next is having shift of focus from family to careers, where as I told before there is importance of nuclear families. So it has direct impact in the economic growth and employment. Next is having importance of family planning schemes such as the Mission Parivar Vikas, where there is usage of the contraceptives. And next is having the maternity leave and workplace policies, where there is limited leave and maternity benefits, so it discourages childbirth. And finally having housing and infrastructure development, where there are smaller places or narrow places which can impact the whole family planning. So here the congested cities make an impact in having whether to have a lot of children or even to even marry and live in a city. So looking into the economic impact, there is rising dependency ratio. So here, since there are few workers to support the elderly, as the as the working age or the non-dependent population are lesser, so it will lead to the impact of having rising dependency population, where there will be very few people to support the elder population. Next is then it leads to the workforce shortage, as the labor market would be constrained with less people or the youth population, as there would be slow growth and there would be impact in the employment on a larger basis. And having decline in consumer demand, as there is less labor market and shortage, it will lead to the declining of the consumer demand and products and market, where very fewer young people are present, so there is no need for any demand for any product, which can reduce the demand. And next is having higher social security burden here. So where there are very less people, there will be increased pension and healthcare costs would be at the peak, so it can largely lead to a inflation. And finally, lower tax revenues, here the declining working population age affects the government tax revenues. Next is the socio and demographic impact. Here, the aging population, that is the elderly, will have a impact on having fewer caregivers, so they will be almost need to be dependent on the state. Here, more elderly would be living alone, so the state would be need to have taking care of them, and it will all increase the revenues to take care of them, so there will be impact in the tax. So it will lead to shift in the family structures as well. And there is gender imbalance. Here the declining fertility will increase or the amplify the sex ratio concerns, and it will lead to delayed population replacement. So again it will fall to the below of replacement fertility, where there is decline of the total fertility rate from 2.1 replacement ratio. So this is the problem in the article spoken. And finally, there would be change in the migration trends, where there is reliance on migration to sustain in their workforce. So more than people living in a place for more than 10 to 15 years, there would be migration on and off according to the workplace. Where we can bring a policy impact, first there need to be a geriatrics healthcare. Geriatrics is nothing but the study of elderly. So here there need to be importance for more elderly requiring specialized care, uh, involvement of NGOs, involvement of caretakers, and also the involvement of both the state as well as the society is important. Next is having pension and social security strain, where there need to be pressure on the employment provident fund organization and other pension schemes, that is the Atal Pension Yojana. So these schemes work more for the development of the elderly population. Next is to have focus on pro-natalist policy, that is natal care, which is the importance or preference to having children. Here in other countries like Japan and France, there are incentives given to encourage childbirth. So not having direct pro-natalist policies, but the impact of the pro-natalist policies in other policies can be encouraged for a country like India, because India is a very diverse country, and at the same time it is one of the most populated country. Next is the need for automation and AI. Here there is shortage of workers, as it increases the reliance on technology. And finally, to increase in the healthcare costs, here there need to be more spending on the chronic diseases among the elderly, and the out of pocket expenses can be reduced. So let us move on to the prelims practice question. Here consider the following statements regarding the declining birth rate in India. So only the statement 1, 2 and 4 are right. Here a falling birth rate always is a very extreme condition. Here leads to decrease in the economic growth. Sometimes it can lead to the increase also, but here always cannot be taken into account. So factors like productivity, migration, employment are all factors related to the economic growth. So not just falling birth rate, but we should also take other factors to check the economic growth. So moving on to the next article titled IAF officers set to pilot mission to space station journey of 1.4 billion people. So here India is set to bring in another space milestone, where the second Indian to travel the space, the first in 40 years, who is a Indian Air Force officer, is set to pilot a mission to the space station which is being set by the ISS, that is the International Space Station. So in light of this article, we'd be seeing the importance of different spacemanship missions which is being conducted by India, their contribution, and at the same time we'll be seeing basics about the Gaganyaan mission. And also in last video we have seen the basics of the ISRO, so now we would be seeing the other more concepts. Indian Space Program has conducted various space programs under the ISRO, that is the Indian Space Research Organization, and there are different milestones being conducted by our country India. So looking into few backgrounds, first is the India's first satellite is the Aryabhatta satellite, which was conducted in the 1975. Next is Rohini 1980, where the first satellite was launched by an Indian rocket, that is an indigenously made rocket into an orbit. And next milestone mission would be the Chandrayaan and Mangalyaan mission, where India's capability was raised to have interplanetary missions. And looking into the human contribution in the spacecraft by India, Rakesh Sharma was the first Indian to be in the space missions in 1984 under Soviet Soyuz T-11 spacecraft. So these are the background. Now let us look into our next milestone, that is the Gaganyaan mission. So India's ambitious human spaceflight mission is the Gaganyaan mission, where the objective is to send 2 to 3 astronauts or the Gaganauts to the lower Earth orbit and return safely. So the Gaganyaan mission is controlled by the ISRO along with collaborations with countries like France and Russia. Here looking into the timeline, the mission is scheduled for 2025. After 2024, there were a lot of unmanned tests being conducted. So looking into the crew model, they will be in a pressurized capsule with life support system. So the satellite or the capsule would be having life supporting gases, mainly air, that would be, and along with other life supporting systems, where the spacecraft is ensured with total support as well as for the protection of the astronauts who would be sent through the mission. And looking into the launch vehicle, the geosynchronous satellite launch vehicle Mark 3 or the launch vehicle Mark 3 is designated to be the launch vehicle of Gaganyaan mission. And looking into the phases of Gaganyaan, first they'd be sending unmanned flights, where they would be known for the test flights along with the Vyomitra, that is the humanoid robot. So these test flights would be involving the crew module also. And the next phase would be having manned flight, where 5 to 7 days a crew will be spending in the LEO orbit, that is the lower Earth orbit at the 400-kilometer altitude. So looking into the training and development involving the astronaut training, they would be taking in Russia's country collaboration and help along with India, where there would be tests like microgravity, where training are involved for the astronauts to survive in microgravity or zero gravity situations. Then other medical tests, their physical tests, their mental tests, and at the same time the astronaut should be knowing the emergency procedures, such as the satellites being affected by the space debris and so on. So the astronaut should be trained for all of the emergency procedures. So the astronaut training involves all of the endurance tests by the astronauts. So the ISRO has implemented the Human Space Flight Center in Bangalore to coordinate the mission activities. So the International Space Station, where the IAF officer, that is the Indian Air Force officer, would be setting the mission in the space station, that is the International Space Station, is a habitable artificial satellite in the low Earth orbit, and thus looking into the benefits for India, having our presence in the Indian space station would help in for the research and technology involvement and advancement, and having international cooperation, as the International Space Station is having collaborations with the NASA, with the Roscosmos, that is the Russia, ESA, that is the Europe, and JAXA, which is the Japan, and CSA, which is the Canada. So all of these collaborations of their space station of different countries would help us to have international cooperation, especially in the space of International Space Station by our country India. So the role of the Indian Air Force officer and their participation shows or demonstrates India's training capabilities, as high stake officers are kept in the responsible role, and it increases India's credibility at the end. So it enhances India's global space presence, and ultimately increases India's credibility and our representation in the global space. And looking into the scientific and strategic implications here, collaboration with the international countries will be boosting our technological advancements, especially with the country Russia, for example. And there is importance to strategic formation, where it strengthens India's position as a space faring nation, where there is importance for national security even at the space level. Now moving on to the prelims practice question: in which city is the Human Spaceflight Center of ISRO is located? And the answer is option B, Bengaluru. Now looking into the next news article titled Managing Crowds at Religious Gatherings, Learnings from an NDMA Study. So the article discusses about the importance of managing crowds and having an alert on the crowd behavior to prevent a lot of casualties such as stampedes and so on, especially during the festival time of the Mahakumbh Mela, which has been recently happening. So a recent study in 2000 sorry, it's not that recent, a study conducted in 2014, where conducted by the NDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority. They have given reports on how to manage the crowds and how to prevent casualties and so on, especially for religious gatherings. Is been discussed in this article, where in the 2014 report they have given the suggestions. So in light of the article, let us see few basics about the National Disaster Management Authority on a total basis. So the National Disaster Management Authority, that is the NDMA, was formed constitutionally under the Disaster Management Act of 2005 on September 2006. So the chairperson, that is the coordinating person, would be the Prime Minister of India for the NDMA totally, that is the on the national level. So along with the chairperson, the members would be included as 9 members along with the vice chairperson. So the looking into the mandate or the objective, here they coordinate for the disaster management as having a quick response. Next is to build a resilient India for any disaster management, and also at the same time to develop policies, plans and so on, so that there is efficiency during the disaster management. So the vision ultimately is to safeguard our country India through holistic, proactive and sustainable approach, especially during the situation of a disaster management, and also to involve stakeholders into the process, so there is participation of all the community members, and at the same time to bring in the culture of prevention, preparedness and mitigation process into the fostering of the importance of having a resilient approach for the disaster management. So these are the vision and mandate when it comes to the National Disaster Management Authority of India, because we'll be seeing the evolution soon, as only after 1999 the disaster was given a much priority for a country like India. So there is very much importance for the authority in itself. So first in 1999, after giving disaster management as a priority sector or as a priority ministry in India, a high powered commission was set up first in 1999. Then post 2001, that is post the Gujarat earthquake, a national committee was created, and in the 10th 5-year plan, there was inclusion of a main chapter related to the disaster management was set up, and in the 12th Finance Commission there were money arrangement, that is the funding arrangements, finance arrangements were made as they reviewed the disaster management funding systems. And finally in 2005 there was Disaster Management Act was constitutionally created, and the National Disaster Management Authority as well as the State Disaster Management Authorities, the two important authorities, were created for the implementation of disaster management on a holistic basis. So looking into the functions of NDMA, here there is, as I told before, they are having holistic coverage of all the problems or preparedness a country needs when it comes to the disaster management, because it not just involved the materialistic holdings or the assets of the society, but also it involves people at the end of the day. So first is to approve a national disaster management plan. First is to have an outlook. Next is to formulate policies and plans so that the plan is being executed. There is implementation of the plan. Then only there will be working of the disaster management. Then helping in to approve the ministries and departments for the certain plans and for the certain policies. So there is coordination between different sectors, issuing guidelines to the state. So the State Disaster Management Authority is one of the most important institutional framework when it comes to bringing in disaster management, as it involves as India will be having different states. So there is importance for the coordination of different member societies. Where NDMA is the apex head, the SDMA, that is the State Disaster Management Authority, would be the executive power to execute and implement the plans and policies given by the NDMA. So it issues guidelines to the states. Next, it integrates disaster prevention in the development. So along with preparedness, there is also a scope for the prevention for upcoming any disasters. Next is to coordinate and enforcement of the implementation of the policies, plans and outlook. Next is to recommend mitigation funding. So after having a plan, after having a policy, next, as I told, the three important culture of preparedness, prevention and mitigation. So mitigation would be the ultimate end step when it comes to disaster management. So there is importance of revenue and fund for the mitigation process also. Next is to provide international relief. So here involvement of lot of stakeholders, lot of community participation, where there is relief programs, relief missions being conducted to protect the people and other infrastructural assets from the post disaster management. And next is to enhance the preparedness and capacity building, as making the India to be disaster resilient. And finally overseeing the National Institute for the Disaster Management. So this authority is an institute relating to the disaster management. First it was called as National Center for Disaster Management. So it was set under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and the National Institute of Disaster Management is set in Delhi. Now looking into the institutional framework for the disaster management, the responsibility ultimately and primarily it's with the state governments. In a national level, the National Disaster Management Authority plays an important role, where the PM is the chairperson, and along with it is supported by the National Executive Committee. So they also oversee the national disaster management projects. So in state level, the SDMAs are very important. The State Disaster Management Authority is being chairperson by the CM of that particular state. Along with, they are supported with the State Executive Committee. And looking into the district level, the District Disaster Management Authority is being taken care by the district magistrate or the collector of that particular district, and the co-chairperson are done by the elected representative. So we'll be seeing more details on who would be included in the representative. And also at the same time, looking into the international framework on the global commitment, India is also a signatory of the Sendai framework, disaster risk reduction. So the Sendai framework, that is the SFDRR, is a set of rules set for the disaster management. It's like a framework for the implementation of the disaster management. So ultimately, looking into the institutional framework, the national policy on disaster management created on 2009 stands as a framework for the any authorities or implementation of the disaster management control. Now looking into the details of the state level institutions, that is the state disaster management authority, as I told before, they are headed by the CM, and their functions is to formulate state plans especially, and to implement the state plans and guidelines given by the NDMA also, and also to coordinate implementation, recommending funding and taxes, having revenues, and also reviewing the developmental plans for the people. And it is supported by the state executive commission, that is the another wing of the state disaster management, where it is headed by the chief secretary. Here their responsibility is to coordinate and monitor implementation of the national as well as the state plans altogether throughout the state. And looking into the district level institutions, that is the district disaster management authority. Here the chairperson is the district magistrate or the collector of the district, and the co-chairperson is the elected representative of the district or the Zilla Parishad chairperson of the panchayat. So their function is to plan, coordinate, implement disaster management measures to bring in the awareness among the people, having community participation, and at the same time to enforce the and implement and overview and review the safety standards which have been implemented are properly taken care, and also arranging relief centers, relief missions or relief programs. So I hope we have a clear understanding on the National Disaster Management Authority on a whole basis. Now let us look for the prelims question. Here, consider the following statement regarding the institutional framework for disaster management in India, and which of the statements are right. Here, the National Executive Committee (NEC) assists the NDMA in its functionalities. The Disaster Management Act of 2005 provides for the creation of disaster management authorities at national, state, and district level. So option 1 is not right, as disaster management in India is primarily the responsibility of the not the central government but the state government. So here the difference between the NDMA and the institutional framework is that NDMA is a national authority for the disaster management, especially in the policy and coordination level at the national level, but the institutional framework, it ultimately comprises all of the levels, that is the national, state and district level. So the NDMA is comprised under the institutional framework of the disaster management of India as a whole. So moving on to the next article titled The Funds Sought by the United Nations Human Rights Chief for 2025. So here the article discusses how the United Nations Human Rights Chief has been appealed for $500 million in the extra budgetary resources for the year of 2025 to support the monitoring and investigation of human rights abuses cases around the world, especially from Syria to Sudan. So the UN Human Rights Office has been having funding shortages in chronic issues such as the wars, conflict zones and so on. So in light of this article, let us see the basics for the United Nations Human Rights Office. So the United Nations Human Rights Office, or the Office of the High Commissioner for the Human Rights, is established under the United Nations General Assembly Resolution of 48/141 in December 1993. So the headquarters are in Geneva, which is in the Switzerland, and they come under the mandate of Vienna Declaration and Program Action of 1993. So the Vienna Declaration is the main outcome of the World Conference done on the human rights in Vienna. And looking into the High Commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights Office, or shortly known as the OHCHR, is the Volker Turk from October of 2022. So the funding shortages is being explained by the High Commissioner of the United Nations Human Rights Office. Looking into the affiliation here, the OHCHR is part of the UN Secretariat, where they report to the UN Secretary as well as the UN General. Now looking into the key functions of the OHCHR here, They monitor and investigate the human rights violation across the countries. Here they advise the governments of different countries on many human rights policies, and they cannot be mandatory, but they are voluntary in nature. Here they provide technical assistance for legal and institutional reforms. Next is they provide support to the UN human rights mechanisms or different wings. That is, for example, Human Rights Council, treaty bodies of the UN, and other wings or other organizations related to the United Nations. They advocate for human rights in conflict zones and other marginalized communities, where they bring in a lot of relief missions and relief projects for the people affected in the conflict zones. So, looking into the composition and structure under leadership, the coordinating authority would be at the apex would be the High Commissioner, who is Walter Turk, who was appointed in 2022, where they are appointed by the United Nations Secretary General, and they oversee all of the activities related to the OHCHR, and all of these activities are approved by the UN General Assembly. And looking into the next leadership in the committee is the Deputy High Commissioner, where they support to the day-to-day operations related to the activities of the United Nations. Here, and the next person would be the Assistant Secretaries General, where they include the senior officials, where they are based on the different offices in Geneva and New York, where they would also be involving in the overseeing of the activities. So the activities generally involve in conflict areas, in on the freedom ideologies, and having real-time solutions to the conflict affected places. And looking into the composition structure in the format of different offices, the offices are usually headquartered in the Geneva of Switzerland, New York office, and other regional and country offices worldwide are present, even in India and other countries, where the OHR, CHR are having offices across many regional and at the local level. So the OHCHR has many main divisions that has been divided among branches. So first is the Human Rights Council and Treaty Mechanism Division, where they support for the Human Rights Commission. They also include treaty bodies of the UN, and they also assist in the Universal Periodic Review. Next is the Thematic Engagement, Special Procedures and Right to Development Division. They work with many special rapporteurs, they work with many individuals, they work with many high officials and individual high officials, and at the same time they focus on many thematic issues such as the right for freedom, other ideological issues, other community issues, and so on. Next is the Field Operations and Technical Cooperation Division. Here they manage field operations, especially in the conflict zones. They provide technical support and assistance. Next is the Executive Direction and Management. So all of these are main divisions among the Office of the Human Rights Commission in itself. Here they handle planning policy, committees, having policy engagement, bringing in coordination, and having internal governance within the different offices of the Human Rights Commission. So there is coverage of every possible problems through the different branches in the violation of the human rights. Next, looking into the human rights mechanism. Next, this division here, it supports the Human Rights Commission. They bring in special procedures or special strategic initiatives, and also they work along with the UN treaty bodies, such as, for example, we can say Committee for Crime Against the Torture, and also Committee for the Rights of the Children. So they can be, these are the different UN treaty bodies. Next, looking into the partnerships, here the office collaborates the many main divisions, and the office on the whole, they collaborate with a lot of UN agencies, government, civil societies, regional organizations, NGOs, different stakeholders, different community participators. So there is involvement of Human Rights Commission implementation throughout the world. And looking into their funding patterns, here the United Nations receives regular funding from the UN on the budget and voluntary contributions from other member states and many private donors. So the news is here is this funding has been having, this funding pattern is in itself is a very chronic in nature, as there is a lot of funding shortages from these participants, that is the member states and the private donors, and even your budget allocation as well as other voluntary contributions from the UN in itself is having a shortage. So I hope the article is clear, and let's move on to a prelims practice question. Which of the following city is the headquarter of the UHCHR? And this is an easy one, that is the Geneva. Here we can take New York, as they are having different divisions and different offices related to the United Nations on the Human Rights Commission. Here, but here looking into the main division or the main headquarter of the Human Rights Commission of the UN would be placed in the Geneva. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you are at the end of the video. Don't forget to give a like, comment and a share. And to further not to miss any other content, subscribe to our channel. Thank you and have a nice day.